What is up, guys? And to the 3.4% of ladies that watch this channel, welcome. Today we have a Pen Battle 36000 that's difficult to crank, as we can see right here. Now this won't be a full breakdown, but if you want to see one of those, check the video description or the link at the end of this video for it. I'm going to open this up, get to where I feel like the problem would be, which would be in this area right here. So give me a second, I'll come right back to you guys. Well, we had the shaft here. That thing, I don't know why that was there. Now we had this piece that was on the shaft that was obviously in the wrong spot. It should have been under that cap, but that may not have been the reason why. I'm going to leave that off, this plastic piece right here. Put all this back together and test it out one more time, just in case. And then if it's still sticky or tough to crank, we'll go to where I wanted to go initially. Now let's cover this up. And I'll stick in a couple of screws, not both, I mean not all of them, just two. But I am going to snug this all the way down just to make sure it's kind of in real fighting mode. Then we'll do a quick test. So I want to make sure that that bushing right there was not the cause, even though it's unlikely. We still want to make sure. Yeah, right there is stiff. So it may not be in here. It may actually be this side plate and the spacers that are on the main gear. So first I'll loosen this up like that. That feels a little bit better. So I think it may not be a bearing issue, which is where I was going with this. That feels better. So let's go ahead and I get to show you something that I don't normally show you guys, which is good. I'm going to show you what I do with these bushings, but there's a couple of steps that you need to do to facilitate what I'm trying to do here in terms of the spacing, or that spacing right there. So let's pull this off. And we will do a quick double check on the bearings up here just to make sure. And then we'll come back to this if need be. And I'm guessing based on what I'm feeling that we probably do, but you just never know. So we want to make sure that that's the case. Pull all this stuff out, leave that alone. All right, so let's do a quick check on this pinion stack. Now, the customer did say that they would use this stuff on the beach and stuff. But if it's the spacing issue, that's not something that would cause that. But based on the conversation, it felt to me like we were referring more to a pinion stack issue there. But this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to do a little test on this. Now I do see a little bit of rust there. Now you see that? That's kind of what I expected and was looking for. So I'm going to see if this can turn, which it does. But that rust is an indication that there might be something going awry here. And even though it turns in this position, the compression is what we're considering here when this rotor nut is locked down to secure the rotor. If you squeeze too much, then you have an issue with that compressing these two bearings or either one of these bearings too much, then it locks it up. Same thing you would have for a conventional reel when you just going from side to side or laterally. So the fact that they both turn, even though I see some rust there, I will try something else first. So I'm gonna put everything back together and then show you what I would do when I'm putting this side housing cover on in terms of spacing for this bearing going against these washers here, or these spacers here. One quick way you can check these bearings on here is that you can just recreate the stack, and this is essentially the stack that you would need. You don't need this part on top of it. And then we just stick this back onto the rotor, like so. Then we're going to secure that rotor nut and tighten it as far down as we're going to go, and then try turning the bearings underneath to see what happens. Now, in general, you're only going to be able to feel the lower bearing, but I'm going to turn this upside down and try to access that top bearing as well. So we're going to go ahead and snug that down. That's as tight as I want it. Just going to turn it over, and then I'm going to feel this one. That feels good. And then see, we can turn all of these, and they all spin freely. So the likely cause, despite these bearings having some wear, would be that compression when the side cover goes on. All right, so now before we go any further, we're going to look at these washers that are on the main gear. And I'd have to check the schematic for this, but I think one of these washers may actually go on top of that pinion stack. I feel like one of these gold ones will be. But essentially what we're looking for here is the spacing between these washers that are on the main gear, that bearing going over it, and how far that recesses into the side cover. So all I did was remove this one that I do believe goes on top of the pinion stack, and that could have been the primary cause of this getting tight. And then I'm gonna try everything out the way it was before. All right, now let's stick this on here versus putting it inside the cover. Dropping this on, and then we're gonna snug this all the way down, again, just using 2 points. And generally, when you put these reels back together after you service them, sometimes what happens is, and not saying that this one was serviced, but when you do it yourself at home, there's a bit of buildup when you put some grease on the inside of this cover where it receives that bearing inside there, and that creates more of a vacuum and causes the bearing to sit lower than it normally would. The same thing would happen on this side. If you had this cap on, sometimes you'll push that bearing down, or sorry, the main gear down, and it'll create a pocket that kind of lifts it higher, and then it feels tight when you crank it. So I've done everything I needed to do. Let's go ahead and crank these down just to make sure. I'm going to spin it and see what happens. Slightly tight, but not tight to the point where it was before. I really believe this is a washer that goes on top of the pinion stack, and when the customer took it apart just to check it himself or do whatever he was doing, he incorrectly put that washer on top of that main gear instead of putting it back where it came from, because that looks pretty good to me. So it seems it's just a user error here and not an issue with the bearings, even though the bearings have some wear. I personally wouldn't replace them. I would oil them and leave them in and see how long they can last versus spending the money on getting new bearings. All right, guys, I hope you liked the video. If you did, hit the thumbs up. I'll see you guys next time.